Here. Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to get started with our connectivity and collaboration panel. Before we do, I just want to mention that we have a partner called Scholate, and they are going to be collating all of the videos from this conference onto their platform, where you guys can annotate and put comments on some of the highlights that you found during the conference. And I also want to mention that we are live streaming, and we've gone international this year. There are folks watching us in Germany, so hello, Germany. So we have here today, we have our moderator is Paula Liu. Paula Liu is a senior manager, community outreach and engagement at Net Impact. We have Matt Lohner, who is global CSR social performance. He's manager at Chevron. Then we have Alex Sloan, who's the director of strategic partnerships at Tides.
All right, thank you for having us. Before we get started on the panel for collaboration and partnerships, I thought we could go around and kind of do a 30 to 60 second introduction on who we are, our roles in our company, and how collaborations and partnerships play into what we do. Would you like to take
Great, happy to start. Can you hear me? Sounds like it. Okay, great. Hi, good afternoon. You guys still awake? Shake it out. Okay, this is gonna be the fun panel, so you're good. We have the environmentalists fighting against Chevron here, so this should be interesting. I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. Let's get that out of the way.
The last panel wasn't bad enough already.
My name is Alex Sloan. I work for Tides, also the Tides Foundation and the Tides Center. I'll talk about that in 1 second, but just from a background standpoint, I'm a recovering venture capitalist. I spent 20 years in venture in Vietnam, here in San Francisco doing .com, and then during the exciting few years of clean tech venture. I left the venture space to do things that I felt had more social impact, and so I joined philanthropy by going to the Skoll Foundation, the foundation founded by one of the co-founders of eBay, Jeff Skoll. Spent 3 years there running the grants program, and then I moved over to Tides, which has been around for 40 years, and Tides is a nonprofit social enterprise that really helps accelerate social change through the work of providing funds and other charitable vehicles for donors, so donor-advised funds and similar kinds of vehicles. We have about 350 clients who have funds with us. We also are one of the leading and largest fiscal sponsors, which is a business that allows nonprofit organizations to get going much more rapidly and much more cost effectively than if they did it on their own. So if you think about having to incorporate, file for nonprofit status, find your banking, accounting, legal, insurance, all those things, we can provide that on a fee-for-service basis, and we have about 150 different nonprofit projects that work out of the Tides Center. We also have a building in New York and 12 buildings in the Presidio where we provide sub-market rate leases for nonprofit organizations. So we're looking for lots of different creative and risk-oriented ways to drive the social change that we seek, which really revolves around shared prosperity and social justice.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? Good, sounds like you can. So I'm Matt Lohner, and I oversee our global CSR program at Chevron. And we think of social performance sort of through a lens of 3 different activities. One is social investment, which is largely a topic that you've been talking about today. And we oversee on any given year, a $250 million annual portfolio in 30 countries around the world. We also oversee our stakeholder engagement program. So obviously we engage with a diverse range of stakeholders in communities where we operate, and want to make sure that we engage those stakeholders in participatory fashion, and make sure that we're promoting a two-way dialogue with the stakeholders that we do work with and that we encounter. And so our team focuses heavily on building capacity of our practitioners in the field to engage in those activities effectively with the right processes, tools, and policies along the way. And then the sort of last pillar of our work is in the social impact assessment work, which is assessing both the positive and potentially negative impact of our operations and communities where we operate around our major capital projects, and then developing plans to manage and mitigate as necessary. So I've been with Chevron for almost a dozen years and have been in the development space for a good 20 years.
Thank you. And my name is Paula Liu. I head up a growth and expansion team at Net Impact, which is the world's leading nonprofit that engages the next generation of leaders to develop the skills and move into career paths that drive different social and environmental movements. Our network is over 80,000 large, and our members engage with us either digitally or through our 280 chapters and 285 chapters around the world. You might have had touch points either at your undergrad universities or at your MBA campuses. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss collaboration and partnerships to kind of get us started. Collaboration and partnerships are really the key to driving, in my opinion, impact and social and environmental change. And research really backs that up with cross-sector partnerships really being the highest potential vehicles to drive impact. So to kind of kick off the discussion, I'd love to get your point of view on how collaboration, or for nonprofits and social enterprises, what the role is or what partnerships' role is for collaborating with government and corporations and foundations.
Well, if I had on me, which I usually do, our Chevron Way brochure, which sort of establishes our values, it articulates wanting to be the energy company most admired for its people, partnership, and performance. So partnership is sort of central to our core mission, how we work with stakeholders across the board. When I think of the benefits of partnership across all of the social investment programs that we've developed and participated in over the years, there are sort of three things that come to mind the most. One is and a couple of these I think are fairly obvious. One is the opportunity to leverage technical expertise and financial capital. So, we're not an NGO, we're not an academic institution. We have we have certain capabilities, but we rely on others to obviously participate in large-scale partnerships. The second area is the area of scale and sustainability. And I'll give a good example. So we're right now undertaking a workforce development partnership in Western Pennsylvania, where we have operations. We've brought in foundations, academic institutions. Obviously, when you think about workforce development, that means community colleges, to try to build the technical expertise. And when you think Western Pennsylvania, if you're like me and you're a little bit geographically illiterate, think more like West Virginia than Pennsylvania, and you'll get a good picture for kind of rural poverty. And so building up the capabilities of the folks who live in this area, and then of course meaningful opportunities so that you're training them for jobs that actually exist, is critical. As was actually mentioned in the previous panel, oil prices have dropped a bit. There are layoffs in the industry, and if we had gone by ourselves to try to develop a workforce development program that was all about our industry, we'd sort of be building a ship for an ocean that doesn't exist. And while we fully expect that to come back, it was incredibly beneficial to have other partners, other manufacturers, other industrial sectors that could benefit from this partnership. They could benefit from a workforce development program that was more diverse. This is the essence of sustainability in development, is making sure that you have the sort of this right supply-demand mix to withstand sort of any kind of economic changes, any strategic changes in your efforts. And then the last thing that I would say, and this is often overlooked and I think underappreciated, is the importance of convening power. In a lot of countries where we operate, you see an absence of rule of law, you see disaffected populations, and there is no mechanism, like a mechanism like this, that brings people together to understand what the needs are, or priorities of particular communities or stakeholders, to be able to address those challenges in both an effective and an efficient way, and using and mobilizing resources in a way that represents good stewardship of those resources. And the ability of any particular partner, whether it's an academic institution or a company like Chevron's, is instrumental. In Bangladesh, I don't know if anybody here from or been to Bangladesh, raise your hand. If you've been to Bangladesh, odds are you've been to Dhaka, not to northern Sylhet. where we are frankly the only game in town. So, when you're trying to look at multifaceted solutions to some serious development challenges, you need to be able to bring people together, and I think that's ultimately the multiplier effect for partnerships that I see.
Fantastic. So it's clear that we have got to engage all stakeholders in solving social problems, right? The historical mode of philanthropy coming from wealthy individuals or from companies, and then that going into nonprofits who then deal with social problems, and then companies are just left to make profit. That doesn't work, and I don't think anybody in the room really wants to work only in that mode, right? I mean, the message that we're getting, particularly from millennials, is to work in companies that have a soul. That have a social impact, that have a social venture. And we really welcome that because despite the tens of billions of dollars available from private philanthropy, that's not the ticket price for solving meaningful social problems. And so we're trying to grow ourselves in terms of really engaging with all sectors, public sector, private sector, and the social sector, and trying to address problems. An example that we're taking on recently here is the Pledge 1% movement, which was spawned out of Salesforce and a few other software companies to try to encourage companies, particularly the earlier stages, to allocate 1% of employee time at least, 1% of product at least, 1% of equity or profit to social causes, and to get going on that. The classic model for, particularly in the technology world, is that you focus down on your product and your growth, you grow the enterprise, you go public, and then you give some money away. And there are wonderful examples of that, Google and others that are doing enormous social benefit through their post-IPO benefits when they're large multi-billion-dollar companies. But how can you engender that culture into a company at the foundation? How can you create in their Series A financing and in their Series B phase an opportunity for employees to volunteer their time on the company's dime during the company time in a team building way, in a culture building way, and to really drive meaningful, particularly local community impact? The same thing goes for product. If there are products that companies make that can be valuable to underserved communities, whether that's about training or learning or access to the internet or these kinds of technologies, those should be available right now. So the Pledge 1% movement tries to encourage companies to take the pledge, to start a program around employee engagement and or product giveaway or product engagement and or allocating their equity. And if you've ever worked on a capitalization, it's a lot easier to pull out 1% of a Series A cap table than pulling out 1% of a pre-IPO cap table, right? That may be worth something in the later stages. And so we're trying to get companies to allocate that equity very early on through a warrant pledge that's held by a charitable institution, in this case Tides, and then to have that grow over time. And so when that company does have a liquidity event at some point in the future, that has already been allocated, it's already available. But you can do the employee piece, you can do the product piece immediately. And so it's not really about just growing an enterprise to profitability or to exit and then being charitable along the way. I think the employees want it and the companies need it. And there are other examples, but that's one that they're working on very rapidly. We've already have 600 companies that have signed up and taken the pledge. We are targeting another 1,000 companies in North America, Australia, and the UK this year, and then 10,000 companies in the next couple of years.
And Alex, I think you actually make a really interesting point. We often don't think of our employees as our partners, but I have to tell you that your point is spot on. When we launched our employee engagement program, I think it was about 9 years ago, and we seeded it, we thought, with more than enough funding to support both employee giving and a Dollars for Doers program with $10 million. It was immediately oversubscribed and grew from 10 to 12 to 15 to 20 million over a period of very few years, and the level of excitement, enthusiasm that infused the company overall, almost immeasurable.
And just from a scale standpoint, I mean, I think you guys have given away something like, or invested over almost $2 billion in a number of years towards social investments. I was reading your website earlier, and you said $250 million a year. When I was at Skoll Foundation, our annual grants budget's around $30 to $50 million a year, right? And that's for a $1.3 billion corpus foundation. You have to go up into the Gates Foundation levels that are over $50 billion in assets to compete with that kind of annual output. So if companies have those kinds of assets available and are willing to put them to work in corporate social responsibility, in engaging local communities, we've got to encourage that. right? We can't have this dividing line between, oh, we're social sector and you're the big bad private sector, which is what I was joking with you earlier. And that's a real shift for social organizations too. We talk more about, let's get companies to shift their point of view. But we also have to shift the social sector's point of view of being able to engage with and be willing to engage with people who they've been rallying against, picketing against, and fighting for many years. And not everything that Chevron and your peer said is that you are doing is positive for global social impact. But the more that we can shift organizations to work together, and that's on the partnerships perspective. So, I want to make the point that it's not just about getting companies to do more CSR. It's about getting NGOs, nonprofits, and the social sector to find creative partnerships, to drop some barriers and some traditional "I will never work with them" kinds of points of view. And this is coming from a foundation where we spent 40 years being kind of wealthy hippies, investing in in the environment and against institutions like that. And so it's a very different phase. It's a very different moment. But I think if we can all focus on we're trying to actually get the social impact, environmental impact done, then we've got to be open to new approaches.
Alex, you bring up a really interesting point. So there's obviously lots of pros to the partnerships in terms of employee engagement, leveraging different assets, skill sets, networks. Sometimes these partnerships are uncomfortable. And there's a lot, you both highlighted some pros, but maybe we can kind of talk in terms of the pros and the cons to these cross-sector partnerships that we've seen throughout our careers.
Well, I mean, sometimes we talk about partnerships in the macro sense, and we forget that partnerships are sort of human relationships at scale. And I like sports. My wife likes chamber music. It seems to work for a number of years, and you find in any relationship a mutual self-interest. I want to go buy a car. My interest is very different from the salesperson who's trying to sell me a car, but they're aligned because these interests dovetail, and I think that's the essence of successful partnerships. Is finding you can have different missions, but you have alignment on the common purpose, and we work with a lot of what you might be inclined to think are strange bedfellows, because they need access. For example, we work with a lot of education NGOs who don't come to us for money. They come to us because they know we have relationships with educational institutions, and they need that access to try to build capacity. If they're trying to build the case for Common Core or the next generation science standards, they need forceful advocates on a policy side. And we need partners who can train the next generation of engineers. So are our missions different? Yeah, but there's this mutual self-interest that guides and can drive very impactful long-term relationships.
So totally agree, and one of the downsides then I think is expectation around time. If you think about how time is measured by the different stakeholders in a multi-stakeholder collaborative, it's vastly different. Companies can't help but have issues related to quarterly and annual spending and impact. I'm sure you get asked on a regular basis, sort of, how are we doing with those investments we're making, right? The social sector, works in much longer time frames. The government sector can sometimes work even longer time frames. So if you're trying to get stakeholders together to agree on trying to drive a particular social outcome, if my time frame is 5 years, your time frame is 2 years, and a policymaker's time frame is 8 years, how are we aligning what we're trying to get done? And so that's important to really set up front. And I think social change takes a very long time. If it hadn't, we would have solved the problems already, right? And so to engage on something that's going to be a long-term initiative, even on a community level, I'm not talking about sort of solving global warming. I'm talking about, let's look at homelessness in San Francisco, like a really local issue in any community. To engage multiple stakeholders, and when we're talking about these partnerships, we're really talking in general about bringing in the private sector, the social sector, and the government sector. You've got to have all these entities working together on these things. But to find common language, to find common outcomes, to find common measurements, then to set goals and to then do the programmatic work over time, and then see how it's going and make those adjustments. And there are always adjustments that have to be made to these programs. It takes a long, long time. And it's very likely that a company, I think the company tend to be the shorter window in the time frame. Companies pivot. They decide that they have invested sufficient amount of resources in a problem and want to do something else. There are other problems they want to address or the communities they want to address. And so that can really leave the other stakeholders hanging out without the support or the engagement of the private sector, if that's the one that tends to exit earlier. I did a partnership at Skoll with USAID, trying to bring in a lot of money together to co-invest in scaling the innovations of social entrepreneurs. And I used to work at USAID. My first job out of college was at USAID, so I actually speak government. And it took me 6 months to align the language of what we were talking about. Like, and those are fairly closely aligned organizations, like a private foundation doing work with social entrepreneurs and the social entrepreneurial corner of a government agency, not that far apart, right? And it took us 6 months to figure out what the hell we were talking about, right? And what do these terms mean? And they need to understand the efficiency, cost effectiveness. We never say cost effectiveness in a private foundation. In a private foundation, we're talking about measurable social impact. Right, and so trying to get even with these two fairly closely aligned entities that are already willing to work together took a long time. And if you added in local governments, if you added in private sector players, you'd have even more different languages. And so you have this cacophony of languages and terms and needs and outcomes and timeframes in mind that are really hard to do. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I think we're a little bit in love with this partnerships collaboration thing at the moment. You know, it's sort of like what sustainability was a couple of years ago. And I'm not saying don't do it, but we have to go into it with real expectations, realistic expectations about what it takes and the patience to do it over time and to stick with it.
And I think you find more complexity among development agencies and NGOs than I think you do with the private sector, because by nature they're mission driven. Right? And so anybody who's doing anything that's mission driven, you think that your mission is the most impactful mission that there ever was. and so there's an essence of tunnel vision that can leave one a little bit blind to other actors that also think that their mission is the most important thing on the face of the earth. And then you overlay now this growing movement around disruptive social impact, where you're taking sort of a startup model, but you're imposing it on things that impact lives of real people every day, and who don't really have the latitude or the flexibility to suffer fits and starts, and they need consistency. And so you overlay kind of new methodologies, new technologies, new innovations over this sort of a multitude of mission-driven organizations, and sometimes it works great, and it's necessary, but it can be very complex and it can be very competitive, and I don't mean in a positive way. It can be very competitive among missions for competing for precious dollars and resources.
And I just want to throw one quick thing into the prior panel again with my venture capital background is, impact investing sounds awesome and I'm a big fan of it, but let's put this time frame piece back in mind. So how much time do your investors want to give you to receive the financial return? How much time are investors willing to wait around to see the social return? Do those come back at the same time? Right? What if the financial return has come back, but the social return will take twice as long to show up? Right? How do you actually return your investors the financial and measurable social return they're expecting in the time frame that they're expecting? And those are two very different metrics. And so I think there are these patience for when the results you're looking for show up are a real concern. And coming out of the clean tech experience, if you don't deliver the financial and social return that you promised, you will not raise fund 2. Right? And if you do not raise fund 2, your firm goes out of business. It's happened to me 3 times. Right? That's why I'm in the social sector now, right? And so these are very important issues. And so collaborating, awesome. But what are we getting into? What timeframes do we have in mind? What are our needs to measure? What are our outcomes that we're seeking? And how do those satisfy all the stakeholders around the table in the timeframes permitted? It's a challenge.
Yeah, I think also the different stakeholders that enter into these partnerships, oftentimes their goal is to kind of like drive into how can we create that impact. And they don't trust the process of collaborating enough, and really just setting up those expectations, having a common vision of what that social impact will look like, and even having contingency plans for exit strategies for stakeholders if the partnership isn't, or the outcomes aren't immediately met or met to expectation. Have you been a part of partnerships where there have been an exit strategy or contingency plans, or what are other ingredients that kind of make up these successful partnerships and collaborations that you've been a part of or that you've seen?
It's funny, in some ways, the best example of really good partnership was the 2 young women that were on that we saw earlier that blew us all away. Maybe unwittingly we weren't paying attention, but they were really talking about partnerships, right? Their parents were partners, their friends were partners. They were building this little microcosm of a cross-sectorial partnership to manage not only the business aspects, but also the operational and logistical aspects, right? And each brought something different to the table. I think where partnerships often break down is, I think to the point Alex made earlier, is setting expectations around time horizons. I mean, you can't underscore that enough of number one, understanding what the schedule is, having clear idea of what does success mean. I think that this is a very squishy science, and no matter how many dollars you invest in monitoring and evaluation, these metrics are very, very different and sometimes very elusive. And so the question is, how much are you going to invest in leading indicators versus lagging indicators? And if you're working with a development agency, they want to measure anything that's nailed down and not nailed down. And they're willing to invest. World Bank's willing to invest in 15, 20-year longitudinal studies. Well, that's not what we're looking at, right? And so making sure you have clear expectations up front for what success looks like, clear metrics, and alignment on mission. And then I think the biggest thing for me, and this goes to both success and failure, is organizational capability. Where I've seen partnerships succeed and fail is having having folks with boots on the ground, with local knowledge and the ability to implement. I think we sort of parachute resources into places all over the world, and where it fails is where we think we're solving a problem, we have all of the answers. In fact, most of the local knowledge, the cultural competency, the issues around conflict that exist between tribes, whatever it may be, are going to be the biggest barriers or opportunities that you're going to face. And when we've done it well, it's because we've front-end loaded the organizational capability among all of our partners, and where it's failed, it's where we've short-circuited or shortcutted that step, and you can lose a lot of ground doing that.
Another thing to keep in mind is buy-in and succession planning. Right? If you have the buy-in of a particular champion in an organization, that's great. That kind of makes all the difference. If you don't have that, you're not going to get anywhere. But if that person gets promoted or leaves the organization, or there's a change in administration or other change, those things can happen, but the deeper you have commitment from the organization to work in the longer term, the more likely you are to be able to live through a succession. And these partnerships are taking 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. Who stays in their job for 10 years? What organizations don't have a major change in policy guidelines over 5 or 10 years? Which government agencies don't change out their presidential administration or the secretary or the mayor or the local department head? And these can dramatically end these partnerships. If we're requiring the engagement of one of your champions and that champion leaves and you don't have institutional buy-in behind that, then you're screwed. And so I think part of the partnerships piece is to make sure that you're providing the information and the feedback that the institution needs, and that you're hopefully encouraging the champions to share the information within their institutions to build their own buy-in. So how can I help you sell this thing more internally? How can I help you to get the information that you need to have this thing be more of something that the organization is owning and not a pet project of a particular executive or mayor or president or whatever it is? Because these things will outlast you. They will outlast most of the people there. If you did a really fantastic collective impact framework kind of a work over 10 years, I'll bet you a lot of the people who were there in year 10 were not there in year 1. And if that's when it goes well. And so I think it's really important to think about it's not just the people around the table. You've got to start there and build the trust and build the depth, but then how do you expand the ownership of the work more broadly in the institution to make sure that they stick and that they stay around?
That's an interesting point. One of our stakeholders for Net Impact is our large network and our members. And Net Impact, I should have mentioned, partners with a variety of corporations, from Toyota to REI. We've also had partnerships that have raised eyebrows in our members. Like we've partnered with Monsanto and with Exxon. And as a convener of different business entities, and because Net Impact believes that business is really a high potential vehicle to drive change, we engage with different corporations regardless of where they are on their sustainability journey. Alex, my question specific to you is, can nonprofits engage with corporations without selling out? And if they do,
well, we're not selling out. It's the company.
And if they do, how do they maintain integrity and stay true to their mission and ensure that they're doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting to understand each other's needs and whether or not what they're doing is actually real. And I think we can get a pretty good sense for when greenwashing is happening. If we're being used by an institution to help them to greenwash. We've been involved just at Tides with a number of corporations for many, many years. One of the notable ones is Patagonia. We worked very closely with them for a long time to understand what they were trying to do. But Patagonia is a great example of clearly a benefit corporation way before there were B Corps, an organization that cares very much about the impact that they have in their production, their customer base. So that's a great one for us to work with because it's very clear who they want to be with. We've evolved over the years, and we have Google and many other clients in the technology sector and others, but I think it's trying to understand what they're trying to do and to stay true to our mission as well. And that's not necessarily always easy to do, but it's understanding what their outcomes that they're seeking, the means that they're doing. Is it more downside protection for the reputation, or is it more actually driving positive social impact, which is a good reason to bounce it over to you now.
Well, I don't see the world in a black and white way. I mean, I see various shades of gray in the world that I live in, and the one that I grew up in. And businesses they're values oriented and they're performance based. They are stakeholder driven and they are shareholder driven. They want to do it well. They want to say it well. And at the end of the day, any company that wants to survive till tomorrow is at some level looking at its revenue stream, at its expenses, and its products and services on a daily basis to figure out how I can survive until tomorrow. So all companies exist on this spectrum at some level. It's very hard to survive on one end of the spectrum exclusively, and impossible to succeed on the other end of the spectrum exclusively. And so the question is, how do you balance these competing tensions? And that's where you find, ranges in different values. You find ranges within our own industry and among our industry and other industries. It would be great if Chevron could operate in Switzerland, but we don't. We operate in tough places. Oil is found in tough places, and you're dealing with difficult governments and difficult community issues. The tension between providing energy to bring millions of people out of poverty to be able to provide energy that is both cheap, clean, and in abundance, something, by the way, that we take for granted here, is not taken for granted in most places around the world. And so we don't view our core mission as being antithetical to human progress. We think it is indispensable to human progress. How we go ahead and undertake that mission, well, that's the tricky part. And balancing these competing interests is why we have a diverse leadership pool, diverse management team, diverse employees from around the world to help debate these kind of issues and figure out how do we balance our environmental footprint, at the same time make sure that we are meeting our shareholder expectations. So, I don't view any organization that partners with us in any way as selling out. I think organizations have to make decisions for themselves whether or not they're going to make philosophical or ideological decisions, or whether or not they want to sort of advance the mission in a holistic way. I obviously have a point of view on it, but I respect anybody who has a different one.
Can I ask you a question? So let's talk about shareholders for a second. Inside Chevron, do you feel like shareholders, ESG screened investment funds, shareholder pressure, is that driving the organization to act differently than it would otherwise?
Yeah, there's no question there's a push and a pull. I mean, it's a great question. Over the last 20, 30 years, stakeholder expectations have continued to change, and they accelerate, frankly, at a pace that, if I'm being honest, is faster than a 135-year-old company could possibly pivot. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how to, on the one hand, meet stakeholder expectations and recognize that both, whether it's millennials, whether it's our customers, whether it's regulators, what are the drivers for our various constituencies, and at the same time try to advance our operational needs at the same time. And fortunately, we have a team of very innovative, forward-looking folks who are kind of pushing our management constantly, and our various executive committees to think what's next. Where do we have to be at? 20 years ago, no one even heard the term grievance mechanisms, right? And now it's part and parcel of what we do wherever we operate. That's an important part of operating in a participatory fashion and fostering two-way dialogue. May not seem like a big thing, but it's an enormous thing when you're operating with communities that don't have a voice in their own communities. So, I think that stakeholder expectations certainly are driving us, but I think where we have to be careful is to not make it just a matter of reporting of what we're doing, but actually making sure that we're backing it up with meaningful action. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road.
And that gives investors a real challenge. And I'll just say from Tides, we offer to our investors, they can hold their donor advised funds in cash. They can also invest them. And we have several investment funds at Walden Asset Management. One is a ESG SRI screened fund. And so they can have their donor funds potentially increase in value while they're waiting to make grants out. We also have, it's called a balance fund across asset classes. It's a typical kind of asset allocation with screening. We also have a fossil-free fuel fund, which pulls all oil and gas and extractive industries out of the portfolio. And some of our investors are much more, and our donors are much more comfortable having their donor funds potentially gain in value by not playing in those spaces. And I don't disagree with that choice, but they're also not in the game of pressuring companies like yours to act differently. And so, there are individual choices about whether you play in industries and invest through vehicles that put pressure on companies to increase their social impact, or whether you say, not for me, I'm out of it, but then you actually don't have a seat at the table.
Well, and I will say, it's very difficult. Look, if you want to invest in fossil fuel-free funds,
it's hard to say it. Yeah.
I can't say it.
Especially for you.
After 12 years, it just
Why would you say that?
won't even come out. Feel free to do that. But it's very hard to be pure in this space. Universities are divesting of oil and gas companies, are also looking very, are also working very closely with oil and gas companies on recruiting, on R&D, on philanthropy, and are not divesting themselves of those kind of opportunities because their students need jobs in the engineering space. They need to advance a whole host of other areas. Many of the companies that you would otherwise invest in rely very heavily on fossil fuels, not just to make the products that you're purchasing, but also the products themselves are made of fossil fuels. There's 99% of what you're wearing and what's in your bag today is made of fossil fuels. So if you want to be pure in this, you're going to have a hard time investing in darn near anything. And so again, I think it all exists within a spectrum of what your, just like we talk about risk tolerance, it's also what your social tolerance is, for advancing a social mission. And it's, it's not easy, and I don't think it's black and white.
And frankly, if there's an extraction contract being granted by the government of Nigeria, I would frankly rather have Chevron take that contract and do their work than have a Chinese company do it. So we may have influence over and awareness of and be more transparent with US-based or Western-based companies, but this work is being done in these emerging markets by a lot of different companies, and ones that have a lot less transparency, zero to limited shareholder influence. And so that's not an excuse, but there is a full range of players who are acting in this space. Some are more affected by ESG, SRI, or transparency, and some are not at all.
My last question before we jump into Q&A is CSR, you could argue there's a convergence towards going away from philanthropy to a shared social model. Why do you think that trend is moving in that direction?
Well, I think, depends on what you mean by the terms. These are fairly broad terms, but if corporate philanthropy means, we gave a bunch of money to United Way, I don't know what really happened with it, but it was great. We took a tax deduction. We told our employees. We did an employee match where we made our employees cough up their own money, and then we matched their money, and then that went off to somewhere. I don't know where it went. Right? That's what kind of corporate philanthropy means to me. It's not engaged. And if you're talking about a shared value model, that is at least hinting at companies see the value in engaging in local communities, engaging with their employees, seeing how other ways they could use their products and services for social good beyond their core target customers. And so I think that if you're seeing companies really begin to buy in with cross-sector initiatives, with seeing how they can leverage for their own benefit as well, right? I mean, I think it's pretty clear, particularly from the millennial generation, that people want to work for companies that have a social position. People want to work for companies that are driving in some way, maybe not as their primary thing, but in some way they're driving positive social impact and engagement with their communities. And if you don't do that, you actually not have as attractive a company to bring your employees or retain your employees in, right? If you had the same job offer from 2 companies in the sector, and one was doing an employee volunteering program on paid time and had a product giveaway and did an employee match on your grants and was involved in a strategic engagement with the local community, and one that didn't, you probably, I think, would go for that one. I mean, this is a selective audience here for that, but I think, you know, it's in the interest of companies to see that there is shared value in engaging and not just a hands-off, write a check kind of philanthropy.
Yeah, that's something we see with net impact research as well. Millennials are willing to see or have a 15% pay cut if it means that they can work with a company whose values are
Okay,
aligned
don't
with
tell
their
companies that,
personal
okay?
Yeah, but you know, the thing about shared value, so I mean, I work really closely with the Shared Value Initiative, and if you take Michael Porter's sort of definition at face value, which is driving your core business mission in a way that creates social benefit as a mechanism to create a competitive advantage, lower cost, innovate, create a differentiated position among your competitors. To me, where the power of shared value exists is in scale. So as significant as our social investment portfolio may be, it's dwarfed when comparison to our supply chain management investments. We have this year, unfortunately, a $24 billion capital expense budget, $40 billion a couple of years ago. So it makes me look like, you know, chump change, right? Which in fact I am, and I'm reminded so on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, if we can unlock and harness the power that exists in that CapEx to even incrementally move the needle on social impact, I mean, that's real change, right? If we can find a way of procuring goods and services locally by building the local network of suppliers in places like Angola and Indonesia, that's a much bigger win for us. A lot more moving parts, a lot more complexity, but a much bigger win than our social investment span. I think the challenge is I think there's in part a movement, as you suggested, from CSR to a shared value lens because of that attractive opportunity of scale. But I think a lot of companies don't really understand it, and it's sort of become a rebranding exercise. And so I think you've got this range, the spectrum of companies that really are trying to understand and unlock the shared value opportunity within their companies and their leadership, and a whole other sort of set of companies they're trying to figure out how to rename their organizations from CSR to shared value. And so I think the journey has still got a long ways to go.
Just add to that also the new market creation aspect of this. If you are a top of the pyramid company and you've sort of maxed out your growth of your sales in the top of the pyramid, you're going to work your way down the pyramid to create a vast number of new customers. But you're not going to be able to sell your product the same way, in the same packaging, at the same price, with the same distribution channels as you're able to sell it at the top of the pyramid. And so a lot of interesting work has been done at the base of the pyramid in terms of trying to figure out what are distribution models, what are packaging models, what are pricing models that are more appropriate for those markets to allow your company to sell that product appropriately in those markets. If you stay, without innovation, you're going to be stuck at the top and you're not going to grow. So if the growth is at the base of the pyramid or lower down the pyramid, how do you find innovative ways of doing that? And through research that I've been involved with at Cornell University, that you have to engage the social sector. You have to engage local communities. You have to understand local communities and understand what are the problems that they're trying to solve that your product actually has applicability to. What are distribution channels? As a quick example, there was a consumer products company that wanted to sell its products in slum type situations and low income situations. They had discovered working through boys and girls clubs and selling their product as a service. Instead of trying to sell a can of bug spray You sell a spray of bug spray through local partners that are going around on a more regular basis and selling that which the local customers can afford, which is instead of the whole damn can, right? And that's not the answer, but that's a more creative approach to engaging, and it's not just going to be through commercial channels. You're going to have to access communities where there are NGOs, where there's a need for employment, where there is innovation. Innovation does not come from the top down, it comes from the bottom back up again. And those require much broader stakeholders, much broader and patient partnerships than just let's take a bar of soap and cut it into 4 pieces and try to sell a quarter of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, these have been it's been an interesting dialogue. I want to move on to the Q&A from the audience and then save 2 minutes for kind of final thoughts before we wrap.
Sure. So one of the questions that we've received is, when you evaluate a social enterprise, do you look at the financial matrix only, or you also factor in externalities? And it's a question that was also asked in the morning. How do you also factor in those externalities?
I think that partnerships come in all sort of shapes and sizes, and if you have the luxury to be operating somewhere where you've got a broad pool of potential partners to work with, you're gonna you might put out an RFA or an RFP, and you're gonna look at everything from the overhead to their financial models to their organizational capacity to technical skills and capabilities to the mission, all of it. In other areas, you're gonna be challenged to find boots on the ground. I remember when we first started operating, or at least had a presence in Myanmar, and you've got a sanctioned country, and the opportunity to work with NGOs who have local knowledge was really compromised. So you got to be a little more flexible. You could contemplate your navel for years without benefiting one single person, or you can hit the ground running. So I think you've got to be able to kind of flexibly adopt and adapt sort of your own expectations of what good looks like depending on the situation.
And I just add to that, I agree with that, but you also need to really figure out what you're measuring on the social impact side. To say, we're trying to drive positive social impact. Actually, can we retire the word impact, please? I'm actually really exhausted with that word. But what are the outcomes that you're actually trying to seek? How do you define impact? What is the measurability? What is the baseline? How will you know if the needle is actually moving or not? Because it's very easy to give lip service to the social impact side, or that any positive returns that you happen to see you take credit for, and that doesn't count. That doesn't work. And I think more sophisticated employees, customers, funders, investors are gonna eventually figure that out. So, how do you upfront say, yes, we're a social venture, here's our business model, here's how we'll pay your investment back or give you a financial return or be a positive, profitable company, and the social return that we're seeking is the following. And it actually is real, it's localized to what you're actually trying to do, it's not pounds of carbon globally, it's not cars off the road, unless you're in the tire business or something. And it has to be very specific. I think we've been extraordinarily weak on measuring social return. That we've allowed industries to go on for years and years about picking retrospectively some numbers that have happened to have drifted in the right direction and calling that social impact. And that's lame. And we shouldn't allow that, and we shouldn't practice that.
Thank you. Matt, this question is directed for you. Have you collaborated with alternative energy source producers?
I'm sorry, the first part of the question?
Have you collaborated with alternative energy source producers?
Yeah, so we have.
You are one.
Yeah, we have a number of different projects around the world. We've always maintained that that we need all forms of energy, and we're a long way away from meeting sort of global energy demand. Over the next 30 years, we have geothermal operations, in the Philippines. We've invested actually really interesting stuff in the San Joaquin Valley in Bakersfield, steam flooding as a way of unlocking hydrocarbons, but working with farmers on water reuse projects, right? So, we're constantly looking at all kinds of forms of energy, but at the end of the day, we are an oil and gas company because the model in terms of the next 20 to 30 years of reaching oil demand at scale, again, drives you back to traditional forms. And so a lot of our innovation is frankly focused on how to find those hydrocarbons in tougher to reach places. And let me add, doing it as safely as possible.
Thank you. Alex, could you comment on your outlook for PPPs?
For public-private partnerships or power producer agreements, right? No, I mean, I think...
That was a good pivot. That was nice.
Back to you. If we don't figure it out and we don't do them effectively, then we're screwed. So my outlook is very positive. That we have to figure this out. We have to be smart going in. We have to do all the things that we've talked about and many other things we haven't talked about in terms of building trust, getting buy-in, understanding measurement, being patient, serving the needs of the stakeholders there. But it needs to happen. You know, I used to work in government at USAID. I did this partnership with USAID when I was at school. I work with a lot of government funders, DFID, the Canadians. And I'll tell you, the development agencies are getting out of this business. Right? They do not have the budgets, they do not have the political capital to keep doing foreign assistance. And so what they're trying to do is push to social entrepreneurs, push to nonprofits, push to for-profits, doing the social work. And so there may be capital behind that governments can provide, but that we're not going to see, you know, the foreign assistance arms of governments providing the resources to actually drive the social problems. And if you have the innovation that can come from nonprofit social entrepreneurs, the innovation that can come from industry, the access to markets, and the vast resources of the social sector, and more important, the business sector, those far outstrip the resources available from governments. And so if we really care about making a dent in the world's most pressing problems, we've got to access and harness these resources. And you can't just ask a private company to go do social work, you know, unbounded. They may not know how to do it. They may not know how to access the relationships. So what can they provide? What can the social sector provide, and where are its limitations? You know, and it's not just on cash transfer. So there are places for innovation, there are places for partnerships, but they're complicated to do. So learn how to do them. I think, you know, if Wharton isn't teaching its MBA students how to do effective cross-sector collaboration, how to create a model where you actually understand the stakeholder needs, then you're not teaching the skills for the future, right? And so how do we train on this stuff? How do we learn these things? How do we figure out what's actually required and bring that into practice? And practice that on a regular basis, and to convene the stakeholders appropriately to build a model to be able to do that thing. I think we have to do it, and we have to get better at it. And leaders like people in this room are going to be the ones who actually figure out the effective ways to do it, get beyond the greenwashing, get beyond the sort of stupid CSR kinds of levels, and get really into how this is done. But it's going to be you guys who figured that out. And there are nonprofit players like Tides ready to go. There are great, you know, technology and other companies like Chevron willing to do that. But you guys will be teaching us how to do that. You will be holding the space and holding the collaboration together. And so you are not going to be passengers on this journey. You're going to be drivers on this journey. So get good at it.
Thank you. So many times social enterprises don't have the capital or the resources to start measuring impact from day one.
That's not true.
All right, I'm not going to ask the question then. Thank you. So the question was, how can Impact AB investing change this?
Well, I actually think it depends. If impact investing actually steps up to real measurability, to baselining, and to reporting with transparency what's actually happening, then impact investing can positively influence it. If we do what Cleantech did and say, oh, well, we think we had maybe some social and environmental metrics that we kind of figured out after the fact, and they are measured in, you know, pounds of carbon globally, then it's bullshit. Right? And so I think the social sector actually has the ability to teach the impact investing sector how to do measurability better. I think actually the social sector does a better job at it, but still not great at it yet. We measure too much activity. We measure too many visits, or how many trainers have been trained, or how many visits to the hospital, or how many, you know, service calls an organization has done. What is the impact of that? What are the outcomes of that? How did that measure against before you did that, against another organization in the same space? So there can be a partnership between the social sector and the impact investing sector in actually figuring out measurability of social impact, but get on it, right? We actually have to do it, right? And it can't be retrospective. It can't be convenience cherry picking of data. It has to be set up front and measured to, and you have to say, we tried, we spent time, and we didn't hit it, right? And so I think that I don't think impact investing, this is my distaste of venture philanthropy, right? Let's keep venture out of philanthropy, right? Venture is not good at what venture does, look at the returns, right? And venture is no good at social, okay? So if you want to talk about innovation and entrepreneurialism in the social sector, that's fine, right? But the investment sector has proven no ability to measure anything other than financial return. So either get good at it and spread it, awesome, or learn it from people who have been doing it. When you, as it was made in the earlier panel, when you make a grant, the money is gone. Your return is automatically zero. So all you have in the social sector is to measure the social impact. And some foundations and funders and some NGOs do a very good job at measuring the social outcomes or the environmental outcomes of their work. That's what should be studied. So can we drop the hubris of finance, that finance can now walk into the social sector and explain how this all works? Screw you, be quiet, pay attention, and learn how the social sector does it, and see if you can do that and measure social return. That would be cool.
Thank you so much. That concludes our questions
Lively
for this
panel.
session.
We're small but mighty.
I'm only the voice. I'm only reading the questions, by the way.
Those
This
are all
was
your
not
It's
questions.
my
my question.
passion.
Those
That's
are
coming
all your,
through.
we know,
I know,
those
it is
are all
that,
your
it is
questions.
that.
I'm not
Those are
mad
all
at
your-
you. I'm mad at the numbers. Okay.
You're the Wizard of Oz. We know those are all your questions.
Thank you.
So with the last couple of minutes, I wanted to leave time and space to kind of offer final thoughts on cross-sector collaboration advice, perhaps, for these leaders and future leaders of organizations and corporations who will go out into the world and create change.
Well, it's funny. So I was actually thinking about this during the discussion. When you think about social impact and social impact investing, there is this, again, I've talked about competing tensions, but this competing tension between being competitive, as all businesses are, and being collaborative, as social missions are. And reconciling that is, I think, is going to be the real trick. I think where we see a lot of challenges is a lot of mission-driven organizations that haven't figured out to what extent they're stepping on good work that's already occurring. If you wake up one morning and realize that your kid didn't have lunch today, and you decide, I'm going to start an app that connects kids that don't have lunch with kids that have too much lunch, that sounds like a great idea, and you might even find a market for it, but you have no idea how that's impacting the school lunch program, right? Positively or negatively. And so the same way that you would scope out any business model, you've also got, I think, to spend some time and think about what are the other sort of unintended consequences of stepping into the social space beyond just advancing your mission. Because when you're measuring the success of your program or your business, what you're not measuring is the impact socially to other things. And I think if I can leave you with anything, is take a holistic view of the ventures that you're creating for both measurement and impact. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
I'm really encouraged by the fact that there do not seem to be the kinds of boundaries between the social side and the business side that were present not that long ago. When I went to business school just 15 years ago, I did an MBA program, and there was also this Master of Public Policy thing somewhere across campus, and that wasn't even involved with this thing. And then even in my business school at Cornell, we brought in the Center for Social Innovation. We brought in the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise. And other initiatives, and this is certainly clearly across business schools now and graduate programs, that you have to understand the social piece, you have to understand the financial piece. They go hand in hand. And I think what's really encouraging about the generation of business and social leaders coming up is they don't see themselves as two different species. Right? These are different ways to get at a problem. There's different ways to create shareholder and stakeholder value, different ways to get at making money, different ways to get to addressing social problem, and they're not necessarily all one or the other. Or something you do for your entire career until you make money, then you do the other thing. Or something you do with your company only in terms of creating shareholder value until you've made enough money to actually be philanthropic. Right? I think the pull now, and it comes from customer pull and comes from employee pull. It's rarely leadership at the top. Right? This pull is requiring that we understand the social environmental impact of our businesses and we turn around the ability of those businesses to actually drive positive and social and environmental impact, as well as driving financial return. And I think it's the people in this room and your peers across the country and those of us working in this space that are going to demand that. And so I'm positive about it, but I'm also concerned about how long it will take. And if we're too patient about it and we don't press hard enough, then we'll sort of dally with this for years and years and not actually get anywhere with it. And so it's going to require constant pressure on businesses, constant pressure on the social sector to innovate, to collaborate, to work effectively together, to measure, to be transparent about results, positive and negative, and to adjust our course as we go along. If we can keep doing that and keep pressing, then we may have the potential to unlock the resources that are available from business, from government, and from the social sector. And if we don't, I think the situation is very grave. But on the positive side, I think we have the high potential for doing that. There's a lot of interest in doing that. It's almost an expectation now from a lot of employees that, of course, we're going to do it this way. Why wouldn't we? Well, that wasn't the case a little while ago, and I think that's very positive. So thanks for having us today. Nice to see you. Thank you. Well done. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So much fun.
So we'll just have you guys step to your right. All right. Okay. So today, we had a fantastic and eye-opening discussion around social impact and how to scale it. I think we can all say that we're going to leave here with so many great takeaways. One that stood out for me is that there are still so many questions around what social impact is. Just about everyone on each of these panels was asked this question, and not surprisingly, there were so many different answers. Moving forward in the years to come, when I ask myself the question, what is social impact? I plan to take all the lessons and insights that I learned today so that I can strive to be an effective impact artisan, as Stephanie Rupp coined that wonderful term. And I hope to be an impact artisan when I engage in discussions on social impact. And moving forward, I challenge all of you in the room today as leaders in the social impact space to do the same and be the next generation of impact artisans. So first, before we head out to our lovely cocktail hour, I want to thank all of our panelists who joined us today. You led several amazing discussions, so can we give a thank you. I want to thank all of our sponsors, and at this point I want to mention Microvest, who's going to be supporting our networking hour in a few minutes. I want to thank the amazing, amazing planning committee and volunteer team that put this wonderful event together. I have to point out that this is a completely volunteer program we put together, and all of the students are taking a complete full course load. In fact, some of us have exams tomorrow. And all of us have full-time jobs as well, so this is not a small thing, and I appreciate all your efforts. So if you guys could stand up. Stand up. There you go. I want to thank you, the audience. Each year that we hold this conference, we get an increasingly diverse group that shares tremendously insightful questions and ideas, and we hope to see you here again next year. Before we go, I'm going to ask all of you guys if you can please fill out our survey that we have on the Whova app. What our goal is to improve the conference, but we really can't do it without your help. And in addition to telling us about your ideas about the conference we had today, we would like you to share any ideas about conference topics that we need to have in the future. We have our planning committee chairs here in the room for next year, and so I think they would love to hear some of your ideas. And also, if you haven't yet, please sign the media release form if you're agreeable to being displayed on YouTube and all of the internet. And so before I turn the microphone over to Stephanie, I want to announce the winner of our lovely raffle. So if you guys, hopefully you still have your tickets. They weren't for drinks or anything, so you should, hopefully you have them. Sorry about that. Oh.
They should be in your name tag.
Yeah, they should be in your name tag. All right. Everyone have their tickets? I'm going to read the number. It's 4588801. Woohoo! That was quick. Last year we had to. Okay, so next we're going to announce the winner of our pitch competition. Is John Jones in the room?
We'll have our judges come down.
Yeah. Is Chris here? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do we have a microphone?
Okay, the pitch competition was a lot of fun. Having done pitches myself and won and lost, it takes a lot of courage for everyone to get up here. So big round of applause first for everybody who participated, please. It was actually really close. We went back and forth on the winner at least 4 times. Given that we have an expert in evaluation here, we had an unfair advantage, but I'll turn it over to John to talk a little bit about the attributes of the winning pitch, as well as announcing the winner.
That's right. Well, we had to lay out our explicit evaluative criteria and set standards, then find ways to gather evidence around it and use our reasoning to form an evaluative judgment. There was a little guessing too, so I would say that the 2 criteria that this came down to was trying to look at how we wanted to trade off the level of development of the idea versus its potential, at least as we could perceive it from a pitch, to do some good, right? And that was a tough trade-off because we had projects at different levels of development with potentially different levels of promise about what would be there, different levels of risk. And so at the end of the day, we decided to throw caution to the wind and go with the riskiest because, we love risk, right?
We do.
We do. So the winner was Good Wealth, which we thought had a great idea, though still very new. So thank you.
Sure.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I just want to encourage everyone to check out our website. You'll see just how new and risky it is. It's goodwealth.co. Please get on the waiting list. We will be hopefully taking investments sometime in the next 3 or 4 months. So thanks again.
And just as a reminder, so Good Wealth will be featured on Wharton Business Radio on the show Dollars and Change, which is focused on social impact. So next, I would like to hand it over to Stephanie Kim, who's going to talk a little bit about the Wharton Social Impact Initiative and the conference that will be happening in October. Do we have a microphone? A microphone.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a terrifying thought to be the person standing between you and your cocktail. So I'll keep this really brief, but I did want to make sure that you knew where to go if you wanted to continue the conversation. The Wharton Social Impact Initiative is the hub for social impact at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. We're based in Philadelphia. I keep trying to come out here and start our San Francisco chapter and volunteer for the hardship of living in San Francisco, but it hasn't been a reality yet. It will happen soon. So we have slides.
Oh, we have slides.
We don't have
no,
slides.
we do have slides. I'll pull them real quick.
All right. Well, I could
We
talk
do
kind
have
of without the slides too,
They're in
because.
In the drive. Okay. Okay.
All right, that sounds.
Sorry about that.
I will bring up my computer just so I have my notes because I want to make sure I don't forget anything. But when we talk about social impact at Wharton, we have this saying about business strategies for a better world. So it's not discounting one type of business strategy or type of impact over another. It's not lauding one over the other, but it's saying what we use in the business world has merits. So looking at market forces rather than traditional philanthropy. It's looking at systems level approaches more than just direct service approaches. And it's looking at an ecosystem strategy more than just one-off activities. So in the impact space, we value everything that happens, but being a rigorous analytical program, we want to bring out specifically the business strategies. So we focus on 3 key vehicles for impact. The first one is impact entrepreneurship. We see this as larger than social entrepreneurship. It could be the cook stove, it could be the solar powered, what have you, but it's also the neighborhood business that employs youth in the area that don't have GEDs. So it's looking at how you could create jobs, how you could create social value through the act of entrepreneurship and even intrapreneurship, which we talked about today. Our second vehicle is impact investing and other forms of innovative financing for impact. So there was a great conversation about impact investing all throughout the day. We have copies of our Great Expectations report in the lobby, so you could grab one there. And you could also visit socialimpact.wharton.upenn.edu, and there is a free copy for download there. So it's looking at impact and entrepreneurship, impact investing. The last one is strategic corporate social impact. So this is going beyond the employee volunteer days, which is great for engaging your employees, but it's how can you bake social impact into the core DNA of how you run your business, in the products and the services, in your supply chain, in the partnerships that you have, and the investments that you make. So we're working with companies to explore that. And all of these things, we don't want entrepreneurship for entrepreneurship's sake. These are all vehicles and tools for impact. So we work to apply them in certain areas. I lead our strategy in Philadelphia, and so Philly is a really cool city. If you guys haven't been out there, I highly recommend you visit. But we have a urban economic development strategy there where we're looking at how do you create more jobs and better jobs for people in the city. So we're applying these 3 tools and vehicles of impact to Philadelphia. We do the same in Africa and emerging markets, and we just launched our Women and Girls Initiative. So it's a lot happening. We do research, we do consulting, we support student groups, we bring speakers onto campus, we support conferences like this. We have the Wharton Social Impact Conference in Philadelphia this coming October, so you could look out for that. We do alumni roadshows because we want to make sure we're connecting with alumni and industry as well as prospective students and current students. And we have visiting fellows and entrepreneurs. So there's a lot happening on campus. Students tell us at the MBA and undergrad level, they come to Wharton because they want to do social impact. And that's a huge and exciting shift in the industry that we're really embracing. So lastly, I had this really great slide that you could just take a picture of, and it shows you all the ways you could follow us. I'm not going to read it to you, but I tweeted a ton today, so you could go and just check that out. But you want to listen to Dollars and Change. That's our radio show. It's 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern every Thursday morning on Sirius XM 111 Business Radio, powered by the Wharton School. We have a newsletter, and you could email us at socialimpact@wharton.upenn.edu if you have any questions or want to connect. So thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure being here, and I'll be on the lobby if you want to chat.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. So we finished a bit early, so we can all head out to our lovely cocktail hour. I just want to remind everyone we do have a breakout session in 641 where we have Wharton Impact Investment Partners that are going to talk about the work that they're doing and are going to present a case that they recently worked on. So please join them there. All right. Thank you.